just looking at some of this story on mining for the end of the week, there are scorching temperatures in Texas, and they've been challenging the power grid for quite some number of days now. Now Democrats are raising concerns over energy use by Bitcoin miners, with the New York Times saying that they specifically want the EPA and the Department of Energy to require more transparency on energy use and perhaps introduce some caps. And I'm wondering, do you think this is reasonable?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Christine. I think a lot of people don't understand the electricity grid as a whole, and they fail to realize that there's a lot of things that miners are doing to help ensure that the grid is still reliable. If you don't know the Texas grid, a little kind of tutorial, it's about 90,000 megawatts of total installed capacity in Texas. An average day in Texas, when it's not, a scorching hot day, they use about 47,000 megawatts. So about half of it is typically used. And so what miners have done is we've come in and kind of bridged the gap to be able to use some of that excess energy, which in most cases is being powered by both solar during the day and then wind at night. Texas has an abundance of wind and an abundance of wind electricity. To put it in perspective, about 30,000 megawatts of that total 90,000 is wind. Now, ironically, wind tends to blow more at night, which is when nobody really uses a lot of power. And so we view Bitcoin mining as a way to help expand the grid and balance out the roller coaster of supply and demand. When it gets hot, like it was this week, we can shut down our miners and allow that power back into the grid to help stabilize it and hopefully avoid rolling blackouts and things in that nature.
Okay, so I guess you've done a good job explaining, during this energy crisis, what Texas has, what Riot has been doing. I'm wondering if you could address maybe some of these congressional concerns raised by Democrats. Do you think it would be reasonable to be more transparent on energy consumption, and do you think caps would be a reasonable idea?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with transparency. I think that, we are very transparent. We put out monthly updates and talk about amount of energy that we're consuming. We put out updates when we're actually curtailing to support the grid. As far as caps, what's great about Texas is the capitalism there is alive and well. And if it wasn't for companies like us buying these long-term contracts and entering in these long-term contracts, a lot of the renewables would not be built. A great example is, we've been approached by solar providers that would like to build solar by our facilities. And once we're willing to commit to using that solar, they can then take that contract from a company like Riot, because we have a strong balance sheet, and then they can go get funding to build more solar. And so we might only take 20 or 30% of what they build, and then that allows them to put more energy onto the grid. And I think without that type of innovation, and without that type of competition, you're not going to see this transition to a renewable grid.
I understand that Riot has the Whinstone mining facility in Texas, and that's powered by coal and natural gas for more than 60% of its generating capacity. So are you saying you're hoping to phase that out into more renewable energy sources?
Yeah, that statistic's a little bit misleading. So that 90,000 megawatts in a Texas grid, 30,000 is wind, and 10,000 is solar. So that's 40,000 out of the 90,000 that is renewable. There's also some nuclear in there. And so what we've actually seen is on an average day where demand is around 47 to 50,000 megawatts, the solar and the wind is actually the cheapest, and they actually stay on longer, whereas the coal and the natural gas are more expensive. So we've had days where the amount of energy that we're using is more than 50, 60% renewable. It just depends on the grid. It depends on commodity prices. Natural gas prices have gone up in recently, so that's more expensive power. And then the renewables tend to be cheaper, and they tend to be at nighttime when there's no demand. And so I don't, those numbers. What's really interesting is coal used to be 20% of the grid, and now it's down to 10%. So again, by encouraging these renewables and using the power at times when other people aren't using it, we think the grid is going to get greener. And I'd be thinking the next 5 years, you'll cross that 50% kind of threshold just from a total installed capacity standpoint.
Interesting. And I guess I'd like to hear your thoughts on New York, because, in New York, they want to put a moratorium on mining, and except for projects that use renewable sources. And I understand Riot has a facility in Messina, New York, and it uses a lot of hydroelectricity. I'm just citing this University of California study that the New York Times has. It mentions that miners have an annual electricity bill in upstate New York that has increased it for folks by $165 million for small businesses, $79 million for individual households, which adds up to about $71 a year for the average household. And I wonder if you think there's room for improvement because of the way, or do you think that because of the way Bitcoin is designed, it requires huge energy consumption to make it more difficult to hack, and that this energy consumption is just necessary for the security of the network?
Yeah, well, Messina is in upstate New York, and the reason it's the location of that mine is it's a former Alcoa facility. And the reason that Alcoa facility was built there is it's near Niagara Falls, and so it's a lot of hydroelectric power. Again, going back to how the grid works, because a lot of people think it's just like you can switch a light switch on and off, but it's not like that. You can't stop the river from running. So hydroelectric power is going to be generated 24/7, whether it's used or not. And so what you're seeing from Bitcoin miners is they seek out the lowest cost power, and most of the time that's in places where there is not any demand. So this, upstate New York, Messina, where it's sparsely populated, we're actually taking that excess power that otherwise would not be used or spilled into the grid. As far as the increase in prices, I think some of that is also due to commodity inflation. I didn't read the study, but when natural gas prices go up and coal prices go up, New York, unfortunately, is still reliant on fossil fuels, and it's kind of New York was one of the first places to ban fracking, which right now, if they had that natural gas, they might have lower energy prices if they were actually producing their own natural gas. So I think sometimes well-laid plans are not thought out of properly, especially when it comes to hydrocarbon use. And now you're seeing some of those plans are failing, and that's what's causing some of these higher prices.
So you're saying that the increase in prices is not due to miners, but to other reasons like commodities prices?
I really believe that if you think about the entire energy grid, we're using those molecules that are not being used at otherwise would be wasted. And so, yeah, I think that the power prices that are going up it could be a combination of both. Again, I haven't read that study, for Riot, we are now focused. The majority of our production is in Texas. The power prices there are cheaper, and it's a friendlier business environment. So we don't think the New York, if they do ban it, it's not going to affect us.
And just finally, do you have any advice for surviving crypto winter as we head into this bear market?
Yeah,
are you selling a lot of Bitcoin?
Yeah, our job, as a miner, is to be a low-cost producer. So again, it goes back to finding those, wasted energy assets. Last quarter, our average price for energy was 2.9 cents. To put that in perspective, the other day when the grid overheated, it went up by a factor of almost 100. So again, when you're thinking about Bitcoin mining, we have leverage to Bitcoin. Prices are down from 69,000 right to 21,000. But we've been doing this since 2017. We've been through other cycles. And if you can continue to have a positive operating margin, which we do, then we're in it for the long haul.